The training room door hissed shut behind me, and I already knew this class was going to be bad. I felt it before I saw it. The whispers stopped the moment I walked in, and every alien eye in the room turned toward me at once. 12 species, 200 students, and I was the only human in the building. My name is Eli Bramson. I am 19 years old. I am, according to the records at Corvexa Academy, the weakest recorded student ever admitted into this program. That is not an opinion. It is a printed statistic on a data pad that every student here has already read. I walked to my seat and sat down without looking at anyone. That was my strategy. Keep my head down. Get through the day. Do not give them a reason to notice me more than they already had. It did not work. Careful, a voice said from behind me, smooth and amused. Do not sit too fast. Your bones might break. Laughter rippled through the room. I did not turn around. I knew that voice already. Thren Voxara. Daughter of a warrior bloodline from a planet with triple gravity and skin like woven stone. She was taller than me by half a meter, faster than me in every drill, and she had made it her personal hobby to remind me of both facts every single day since the semester began. I am fine, Thren, I said quietly, keeping my eyes on the console in front of me. Fine, she repeated, stepping around my chair so she could look at me properly. Her eyes were a deep amber, sharp and unblinking. Your species invented fire 6,000 years ago, and you still call that an achievement. My people were building cities in orbit before your ancestors learned to walk upright without falling over. More laughter. I clenched my jaw and said nothing. She was not finished. Do you know what the instructors call you when they think none of us are listening? She asked, tilting her head. They call you the experiment. The one they let in to see how long a human survives here before quitting. That one landed harder than the others. I felt my face go hot, but I kept my voice level. I have not quit yet, I said. No, she agreed, smiling in a way that showed too many teeth. But the semester is young. The instructor walked in before she could say more, and the room snapped to attention. Commander Vel Sarndetha, senior combat instructor, third in command of the entire academy. He did not smile. He never smiled. He simply looked at us like we were all still unfinished. Today, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room without effort. We run the collapse simulation. Full life support failure. No warning. No preparation. You react, or you fail. A murmur went through the class. The collapse simulation was infamous. It was not a drill you studied for. It was a test of instinct. Thren leaned toward me one last time before taking her seat. Try not to embarrass your entire species today, human, she whispered. Though I suppose it would not be the first time. The lights went out 3 minutes into the exercise. Not the simulated lights, the real ones. I felt the floor shudder beneath my boots, and for one long second, nobody in the room moved. Then the emergency lighting kicked on, dim and red, and the ship-wide alarm began to wail. This is not part of the simulation, Commander Detha said, and for the first time since I had met him, there was an edge in his voice. He tapped his wrist console. Nothing responded. He tapped it again. Still nothing. Systems are not responding, he said. Confirm status. Silence. Real silence. The kind that presses against your ears. The kind of silence a room makes when its life support has actually stopped. I felt it in my chest. Before anyone said the word out loud, the air had changed. It was thinner, colder. The station has lost primary power. A voice crackled weakly through the wall speaker, broken and distorted. Reactor core is unstable. All personnel proceed to designated shelters immediately. This is not a drill. 200 students who had spent their entire lives training for structured, predictable danger suddenly found themselves facing the one thing none of their training had prepared them for. Chaos. Students began shouting over each other in a dozen languages. Some ran for the door and jammed it shut, trying to force their way through at once. Others simply froze, staring at the failing emergency lights like they expected them to fix themselves. Thren, for all her strength and speed, stood rooted in place, her amber eyes wide and locked on the flickering red glow above us. I do not know exactly what happened inside me in that moment. I have thought about it many times since. Maybe it was something buried deep, something older than me, something that had been waiting a very long time for a moment like this. I stood up. "Everybody stop pushing the door," I said. My voice did not sound like my own. It was calm, steady, louder than I expected. Nobody listened. The crowd at the door kept shoving, and one of the smaller students was pressed against the frame, gasping. I walked forward, took hold of the two largest students blocking the exit, and pulled them apart with more force than I knew I had. They stumbled back, startled, staring at me like I had grown a second head. "The door will not open because the pressure seal has not equalized," I said, checking the panel beside it. "If you force it now, you will vent the corridor atmosphere into this room and kill everyone in here. Step back." For the first time since I had arrived at this academy, 200 alien students went quiet and did exactly what I told them to do. I worked the manual override panel, the kind we had been taught to ignore, because no modern system fails that completely. My hands moved on their own, finding the sequence, cycling the pressure lock the slow way, the way you do it when the smart systems are gone, and all you have left is your own two hands and a little bit of memory. "How do you know how to do that?" Thren asked. Her voice had lost every trace of its earlier mockery. I did not answer right away. I was too busy listening to the groan of failing metal somewhere below us, counting seconds, calculating how long we actually had. "Because where I come from," I finally said, "systems fail all the time. You learn to survive without them, or you do not survive at all." The door hissed open. Cold, thin air rushed past us from the corridor beyond. "Move," I said. "Single file. Smallest students first. Do not run. Running wastes oxygen you might need later." They moved. Every single one of them, including Thren, fell into a line and did exactly what I said. The corridor lights were dead, except for the faint red glow of emergency strips along the floor. Smoke curled from a ruptured conduit somewhere ahead, thin and acrid. I could hear the distant groan of stressed metal, the kind of sound a structure makes right before it decides whether it wants to hold together or come apart. "The shelters are on level 3, Thren said, falling into step beside me. Her earlier arrogance had been replaced by something I had never seen on her face before: uncertainty. "Level 3 is on the other side of the reactor core," I said. "If the core is unstable, that whole section could already be sealed off, or venting radiation. We need another way." "There is no other way," she said. "That is the only shelter path on this deck." I stopped walking and closed my eyes for a second, picturing the schematics we had been forced to memorize in orientation, the ones everyone assumed we would never actually need. "There is a maintenance shaft 2 corridors down," I said. It was not on the official map, but I saw it during the tour. It runs beneath the reactor housing and comes out near the auxiliary shelter on the far side. It will be tight, and it will be dark, but it avoids the core entirely. "How do you even remember that?" a boy near the back asked, his voice shaking. "It was one tour, weeks ago." I did not have a clean answer for that. The truth was simpler and stranger than anything I could explain quickly. "Where I grew up, you learned to notice every exit in a room the moment you walked into it, because you never knew which one you might need." "Just trust me," I said. "We are running out of time to argue about it." We moved fast down the corridor, the group tightening behind me. Twice we had to duck under sparking conduits. Once, a support strut gave way somewhere above us with a shriek of metal, and half the group screamed and scattered before I got them calm and moving again. Thren stayed close to me the entire time, watching everything I did with an intensity that made me almost as nervous as the collapsing station around us. "You are not acting like the human who sat quietly in class an hour ago," she said, as we reached the maintenance shaft entrance. "An hour ago, nobody's life depended on it," I said, prying the access panel open with a length of loose piping. "Priorities change." The shaft was barely wide enough for one person at a time, hot from the reactor housing running alongside it, and completely dark except for the faint amber glow bleeding through seams in the wall. I went first, feeling my way forward by touch, calling instructions back over my shoulder. "Watch your head here. The ceiling drops. There is a ledge in about 10 meters. Step over it. Do not step on it. It will not hold weight." "How do you know it will not hold weight?" someone called from behind me. "Because I can hear it flexing," I said. "Listen." There was a pause, and then a small voice near the back whispered, "I hear it too." We crawled and climbed and squeezed through that shaft for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 15 minutes. Somewhere in the middle of it, the station shuddered hard enough to knock dust from the ceiling into our hair and eyes, and someone near the back began to cry quietly. I heard Thren's voice, low and steady, telling them it would be all right, that we were almost through. I had never heard her speak that gently to anyone. We came out into the auxiliary shelter just as the main lights flickered back to a weak, stable glow. Emergency crews were already there, and the moment we climbed out of the shaft, they swept in, checking each of us, wrapping thermal blankets around shoulders, counting heads against a roster. 206, an officer said, scanning her datapad in disbelief. Every student from Deck 4 training room, all accounted for. Commander Detha appeared through the crowd a few minutes later, his uniform scorched at one shoulder, a datapad clutched in his hand. He walked straight toward me, and for a moment, I thought I was in trouble for breaking about a dozen safety protocols. Instead, he studied me for a long moment, and then said, quietly, "Where did you learn to navigate a collapsing structure like that, cadet?" I did not know how to answer that in a way that would make sense to someone who had never needed to know it. "I did not learn it here," I finally said. He nodded slowly, like that answer told him more than I realized, and walked away without pressing further. It was Thren who found me an hour later, sitting alone against a bulkhead, while the rest of the students were processed and questioned. She sat down beside me without asking, which was new. She had never sat beside me before. "You saved my life today," she said. It was not an accusation this time. It was just a fact, spoken carefully, like she was still testing how the words felt in her mouth. "I saved a lot of people's lives today," I said. "You were just one of them." She was quiet for a while, turning something over in her mind. "I have called you weak since the day you arrived," she said finally. "I called your species primitive, feral, unworthy of a place here." "I remember," I said. "I looked up your homeworld's records after the drills started, while we were waiting to be processed," she continued. "I wanted to understand how a species with no natural armor, no claws, no enhanced strength, managed to build starships and walk among the rest of us at all." "And what did you find?" I asked, though some part of me already knew where this was going. "I found a planet that tried to kill its own inhabitants, in every possible way, for as long as your species has existed," she said. "Storms strong enough to level cities, predators larger than anything I have ever fought, diseases with no cure, ice ages, deserts that stretch farther than my eyes can imagine. And your kind survived every single one of those things, not because you were the strongest, but because you were the ones who never stopped adapting." I did not say anything. I let her keep going. "You do not have thick skin or sharp claws," she said. "You do not have my strength or my species' resistance to extreme temperatures, but you have something else. You remember every exit before you need it. You build a plan for failure before failure even happens. You move calmly through chaos that would break most of my own people. It is not a gift," I said quietly. "It is scar tissue. My species learned those things because we had no other choice. We were never at the top of anything for most of our history. We were prey animals who figured out how to stop being prey." Thren looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her amber eyes. "On my planet," she said slowly, "strength is inherited. It is given at birth, built into muscle and bone, before a child ever takes a single breath of open air. We do not have to earn it. We simply have it." "That sounds nice," I said honestly. "It is not the same as what you have," she said. "What you have, you built yourselves. One disaster at a time, one collapsed system at a time, one impossible situation at a time. Nobody gave it to you. You made it." I thought about that for a while. Nobody had ever put it quite that way to me before, not even the instructors who had approved my admission into this academy, against what I later learned were significant objections from the review board. "I mocked you because I believed the reports," Thren said finally, "because it was easier to believe your kind was weak than to imagine there was a whole species out there who had survived worse than anything my ancestors ever faced, and had done it without any of the advantages mine were given." You do not owe me an apology, I said. I am not finished, she said, and there was something almost fierce in her voice now, though not the fierceness of mockery. This was different. I am not apologizing because I have to. I am apologizing because I was wrong, and I do not like being wrong about things that matter. That, I decided, was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. Word of what happened on Deck 4 spread through the academy faster than any official report could have managed it. By the next morning, students I had never spoken to were nodding at me in the hallways. A few of the largest, strongest cadets in the upper years actually stopped to ask me questions about the maintenance shaft, about how I had known the ledge would not hold weight, about how I had kept 200 panicking students calm and moving in complete darkness. I did not have perfect answers for any of them. The truth was messier and less impressive than the story that was spreading. I had been scared the entire time. My hands had been shaking, even while my voice stayed steady. I had guessed at some of it, calculated other parts, and gotten lucky more than once. But somewhere along the way, in that dark and heat and creaking metal, something had clicked into place that had nothing to do with strength or size or any of the things Thren's people were born with. It was quieter than that, older than that. The simple, stubborn refusal to stop moving forward, even when everything around you was falling apart. A week later, Commander Detha called me into his office. He did not smile, because he never did, but there was something different in the way he looked at me this time. The review board wants to reassess your file, he said, sliding a datapad across the desk toward me. They want to know how a cadet with your listed physical scores managed to lead an evacuation that our own emergency systems failed to coordinate properly. What did you tell them? I asked. I told them the truth, he said. That your species has spent its entire history learning how to survive in places that should have killed you 100 times over, and that somewhere in that struggle, you built something the rest of us never had to build for ourselves. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. There is a reason your species was allowed into this academy, despite every objection from half the review board, he continued. Some of us believed that a species shaped by that much hardship, for that long, might turn out to be more valuable than anyone expected, once given the chance to prove it. He tapped the datapad, and my file appeared on the screen between us, the old weak marking still stamped across the top corner. I am recommending this classification be changed, he said, effective immediately. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in months, though the feeling did not last long, because Thren was waiting for me in the corridor outside, arms crossed, a familiar look in her eyes that I had learned to recognize. So, she said, falling into step beside me as I walked, the weak human turned out to be the reason 200 students are still alive. Something like that, I said. I suppose that means I owe you a proper training match, she said. Since apparently your kind does not know how to back down from difficult situations, even when it would be smarter to. I suppose it does, I said, and for the first time since arriving at this academy, I actually smiled. We walked together down the corridor, past students who had once laughed at me and now watched with something closer to curiosity, maybe even respect, and I found myself thinking about home, about a small, fragile blue planet full of people who had never had it easy, who had clawed their way up from nothing again and again, and who had somehow, against every reasonable expectation, made it all the way out here among the stars. The galaxy had assumed we were the weakest species in the room. They were only now beginning to understand what that kind of weakness had actually built.